Hour, we're getting a new look at how independent voters feel about Donald Trump's recent criminal conviction. According to a new polling from Politico magazine and Ipsos, 53% of independents believe Trump is guilty of the charges he was convicted of last month. 32% also say the guilty verdict makes them less likely to support him at the ballot box. And 21% of independents say Trump's conviction is important to their November vote and makes them less likely to support him. Let's bring in senior writer for Politico magazine, Ankush Khardori. He's a former federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice, where he specialized in financial fraud and white-collar crime. Thank you so much for coming on the show this morning. So the polling is interesting. The polling seems to reflect that some people are pretty moved by the conviction of Donald Trump by a jury of 12 peers. Yet the Trump campaign keeps characterizing it as Biden's Justice Department attacking him. Do you think that that will break through?
Well, look, I think that it does seem to have had some effect on some portion of the American electorate. As you noted, this is a net negative issue, I think, for Trump, both across the American population more generally and across independents specifically. But one of the things that struck me about the results of our poll was that there's still a large amount of skepticism or uncertainty around some sort of key facts here, including among independents about whether Joe Biden was directly involved with bringing this case, whether the Justice Department was directly involved. These things are not true. And yet you have substantial numbers of Republicans and independents who either say that they believe them or don't know. And a sizable number of people think that the case was brought to help Joe Biden. So I think that those numbers suggest that Donald Trump's messaging in this area, which has largely not been counteracted up until now, may have had some effect. But at the same time, there are a sizable number of people, about a third of respondents, generally and independents, who say that they still don't understand the case very well. And as you folks were just talking about, next week there's going to be a debate. It'll be the first time both of these men are on the same stage together talking about this issue. And there are a lot of dates between now and November, including Trump's sentencing and Alvin Bragg's testimony, that could shape how people view this prosecution and the results. Right. So I think that there are some real live variables here in this literally unprecedented situation.
Yeah, totally. John Heilemann, first of all, if people think that Joe Biden's Justice Department was responsible for this and responsible for the conviction, well, they're just not trying very hard. I'm sorry. I'd love to say, well, I can understand how people... No, I can't understand how people would be so ill-informed or so biased that they would be pushed off to think that a jury of 12 jurors in a New York State case was this conviction was masterminded by Joe Biden. They're just not trying very hard to not be stupid. That's number one. Number two, I've got to say, we're talking about a 50-50 race in Wisconsin, a 50-50 race in Michigan, a 50-50 race in Pennsylvania. You know where I'm going. If 7% of Republicans are less likely to vote for him because of the conviction, and 21% of independents are less likely to vote for him because of the conviction, you don't need a majority. You don't need a plurality. You just need numbers like that to swing all three of those races and the election, if in fact these numbers hold.
Right. And, Joe, the Biden campaign talks a lot about 6% in 6 states. 6% of the vote in 6 states, the available persuadable electorate. That's what they think of that. They kind of roughly, there's some states they might say 7. Some states they would probably say more like 5. But that's, you and I have been talking about this for a long time. It's a margin of error race. It's going to be one, therefore it's going to be won or lost on the margins. It's not, the things that are going to sway this election in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, probably the key 3 states for Biden's path back to the White House, are going to be things that move voters where you're going to say, that's not very important. That's only moving 2 or 3% of the vote. Well, 2 or 3% of the vote could end up being the amount that ends up determining the election. And Ankush, I wanted to ask you about that in that context, since we're talking about things are very small, very small changes in electoral preferences and very small target of an audience. On the basis of the polling that you've been writing about here, What do you think I know that you have some data on this about how much the sentencing matters? Not just the guilty verdict itself, but does it matter whether Donald Trump is sentenced to jail time or not? How does that move the needle on this matter?
Well, look, it's interesting. We also have asked, what people think the appropriate punishment should be. And, most people don't think he should go to prison. And that's held over time for at least this case. Obviously, he has a bunch of other cases. But the sentencing, I think it will necessarily kind of focus Americans on the reality of this situation, the potential consequence, whether that is a potential proposed period of incarceration that would maybe be served sometime down the line, subject to November and appeals and all that, or a fine or probation or something like that. But the sentencing, I think, more important than, or as important, I would say, is like what the ultimate conclusion will be how the judge approaches it, how he frames what he decides to do, and how the media interprets it. So obviously, if Trump were hauled off to prison, that would be a major event. That's not what's going to happen on July 11th, however, which is the sentencing date. And the day after that, Alvin Bragg is scheduled to testify in front of Congress. So I think we're going to be seeing a series of events, as I said, starting with with the debate next week, that are going to shape voters' perceptions of this. And the thing that I took away among everything else from the poll is that this conviction is an issue, meaning a capital A, capital I, meaning an issue whose persuasion, that can be the subject of persuasion, whose salience can be elevated or potentially reduced based on the actions of the campaigns and the actions of the media. And at the margins, it may matter for certain types of voters, but just like in 2016, you might have a litany of issues that matter to voters at the margin. This may be one. Abortion may be a different issue for a different group of people. The economy may be a different group for a different group of a different issue for a different group of people. So I think we're just going to be seeing a steadily progressing series of events that are going to help shape the public's views. And starting with next week, I think it's going to be very, very vital for the Biden campaign to really sharpen its message here.
Senior writer for Politico magazine, Ankush Khaduri, thank you very much for your reporting this morning.